d4, knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, e4, d6, knight f3, short castle, bishop p2, e5, short castle, knight c6, d5, knight e7, knight e1, knight d7, f3, f5. Okay, we can get this through the other move order. Bishop e3, f5, f3 is the same, and f4, bishop f2, g5. Okay, this is a position like most classical, and here white has several options to attack with a4, with rook c1, and so on. So in this chapter we will discuss the plan with a4. Important here immediately to remember that on a4 we have to stop this advancing of this pawn by playing a5. We also fight not only for the attack on the king side, but also fight for the squares, for the space on the queen side. It's also about slow down his attack and to make more difficult his advancing. So here he has immediately a pawn sacrifice on c5, very typical, but this is maybe not the best version for him. Knight c5, bishop c5, dc5, bishop c4, king h8, knight d3, b6, and his initiative stacks. Another attempt to play against a5 is to try to block as fast as possible this g4, the march. In this case, it's good enough just to take on g3, open the position, and to put the pawn to h5. Later, one of the main ideas is to play knight g6 and h4. 14, after a5, it's knight d3. Of course, it's very natural for him to bring this knight to support both c5 and b4. This will be the main moves for him, especially that c5 is stopped by b6, so there is nothing better than the plan with b4 here. This plan can be executed in a few ways. One of them is immediately b4, then we take on b4, knight b4, and play knight f6. So the knight already is not very useful on d7. Opposite, he can be helpful for playing g4. After knight f6, let's say he goes a5. This is the most fast way. ba5, knight c6, knight c6, dc6, bishop e6, c5. So this is typical way for white to play, thanks to some space advantage. They are trying to be fast to open the files on the queen side and in the center as well. But exactly in this case, after dc5, bishop c5, queen d1, we are still first of all pawn. Bishop c5, queen d1, we are pawn up. Yes. Rook fd1, rook b8, knight b5, and knight e8. So later we'll bring the bishop f8. I mean, pawn up, it's pawn up. 17, rook a3 here is the idea to prepare this knight b5 attack, and we can wait for knight b5. Remember, we said the rule is that if the pawn e4 is protected only by the pawn f3, and the knight, we have the knight on f6, we can always examine this possibility of playing here g4, because after he takes on g4, we can take on e4. This is a typical idea. So we do play g4 immediately. Why to waste time? Because especially sometimes the square h5 can be useful for the knight. For example, after g4, fg, if he would play bishop h4, then g3 is very strong. On hg, knight g6 is clear compensation. That's why after g4 he takes fg. Then we play knight takes e4, queen c2, knight f2, rook f2, sorry, queen c2, knight f2, rook f2, and knight to g6. We have reasonable position here, both sides. I mean, it's equal material. He has some squares, but we also have the strong pawns. It's about equal. So that's all about the plan with b4, 15 b4, immediately. In a way or another, he can try it in a different. I mean, he can start first with bishop e1. What is about this bishop e1? It's a very tricky move. First of all, he frees the square for the knight. He changes his setup, so the knight will go to f2. Probably, not necessarily. From the other hand, his attack is supposed to, he wants to jump his knight to b5, to play b4, and the bishop will come to this diagonal, as well as he will support the potential play with a5. So, I mean, this is interesting maneuver, and it's one of the main. So, we play knight f6. Now, for example, he can immediately start b4, a b4, and knight b5. So, as I said, the idea is to bring the bishop with tempo to b4. The pawn on e4 is hanging, so we can play g4. He plays bishop b4, and we go g3. This is another joyful situation for black. We already can order some drink to enjoy this, because some coffee, and to relax, because from this point of view, I think it's one way. It's one way attack, even it's not so obvious in the beginning. Let's say a5, there is brilliant move c5 counterattack, but we saw this move already before also. c5, bishop e1, ba5, queen a4. So he still insists to take this pawn. Okay, if you want, you take it, but what will you do with your king? Bishop a5, queen e7, queen c2, and okay, so already we know these ideas. Knight d5, c d5, queen h4, h3, and the point, of course, is to sacrifice the bishop. Queen h3. It's not mate yet, it's true. Bishop d1, so the queen protects the second rank, and it looks like the attack stacks, but it's not true, because we have here this inclusion of the knight to the play. Knight h4, now g2 is in the air already. Knight e1, and rook f6, bringing more pieces into the play. Okay, to rook g6. Knight c3, and nice rook a5, rook b2, rook a1. I mean, using the fact that the rook was busy with protecting against g2, we took this bishop, winning for black. It was another correspondence game. That's about a5 on g3. He can also on g3 play h3, and here your hand shouldn't shake, and just do it. Bishop takes h3, it's working. It's strong enough. Gh3, the point is that after queen d7, we can either transport to the positions we just saw. Either if he plays quick knight f2, we can even take our time. Knight g6, because on knight g4, h5 we have queen d3, h5. And don't rush with taking on f2. We do it on the convenient for us situation. Knight h7, king f1, knight g5. This good play. The other way for him to defend this pawn is king g2. In this case, knight g6 is coming. That's how we gain control over the squares h3 and g2, by attacking it with, including with the knight from h4. Knight g6, rook h1, knight h4. We are pieced down, but attack is really strong. Knight king g1, and here comes another tactical motive in this situation. This knight takes e4, f e4, f3. This was the game Anderson Ericsson 2000. And white was hopeless. 16, knight f2 could be also a move in order to stop all these wild attacks. h5, h3, king h8. That's how we prepare g4. Our plan is very simple, to bring the other knight to g4 and later to put somebody on g5, rook g8, make bishop f8 and so on, and to prepare g4. Also, white has clear ideas. Knight b8, knight eg8, b4, so everybody is doing his plan. It's a long term. Knight h6. Now he has a choice. He can play c5 immediately, or he can take first on a5. If he takes first on a5 and try to play for bishop c3 and attack on a5, then we play rook f7, queen e1, and g4. I think this pawn is not that important. Rook b1, bishop f8, king h1, rook g7, and we want to take on h3 and put the rook on g3. It's very sharp play, but I think our attack is good enough, at least to keep the dynamical balance. So let's see if he doesn't take on a5, if he plays immediately c5. Then we take on c5, and again play rook c7. So the plan is more or less same in all situations, to put rook on c7, f7, bishop to put on f8. Yeah. Rook c1, bishop f8. Now we are kind of ready to play g4. The point is to play g4 and to put the rook to g7 and then continue the pressure on the g file. That's why he might make a prophylactical move here. Queen c2. There are two types of prophylaxis, active and passive. Passive, it's just you defend, and active, it's when you make a counterattack. In this case, the counterattack is after g4, he would play knight c7, and either will put the knight to e6, either will take the rook. So here we have to react, knight e8. But g4 it's in the air again, so if he plays, let's say, queen d3 here, rook g7, rook c2, king g8, queen d1, bishop d7, queen c1, and now this was Bachmann Frolov from 94 from Berlin. Now black should continue with g4. Fg, and now not to rush with take, but to play knight f6 first. Bishop h4, bishop e7 is advantage for black. Let's have some summary about this line with 13a4, which is a very tricky line. I must say that we have to be careful on the very beginning on 13a4 to stop it with a5. Otherwise, our plans are more or less similar to previous chapters. We prepare g4. There is one important thing how to settle our pieces, is to bring the king to h8. Knight from e7 goes to g8 to h6, and that allows us to protect and to support with the maximum number of pieces the movement of the pawn to g4. So we put the knight on h6, knight on f6, rook on g7, bishop on f8, and we play g4. This is more or less the basic plan. On the queen side, we don't have to worry too much. We just have to know that if we put a5, b6, it's enough there, and our plan with g4 will be fast enough in order to compensate his attack on the queen side.